the same things. I'm assuming he's probably asking the same questions. What do you do when you're kind of in exile? And so we're going to look at, so of course, chapter 18 opens up and the Israelites they're in a bad way. The prophets had prophesied that they were Jerusalem was going to be torn apart. 586 BC, King Nebuchadnezzar's come in to Babylonians, and he's gone into Jerusalem. He's taken the best of the best, and he's taken them kind of captive. And in 2 Kings 24, verse 14, it says he carried all Jerusalem into exile. All the officers and fighting men and all the skilled workers and the artisans, a total of 10,000. The only ones he left, it says, were the poorest of the land. So Nebuchadnezzar goes in and he pulls all the best and brightest that Jerusalem had to offer. And again, they would have known this because the prophets foretold this to Israel. Remember God said, was last week, he said, there's no remedy. These people have done evil, there's no remedy. But he had the promise to David that the Messiah would come out of the tribe of Judah in honor of David. Remember, he told that. And God won't go back on his promise. Aren't you glad about that? Aren't you glad that what he says in his word, he will not go back on that? And so the Israelites in Jerusalem, they were living in the promised land, and suddenly they're gone. Suddenly the promised land's gone, and they're living in exile. Don't you think you wonder, is the promise still good? You ever wonder, why is the world like it is? God's promise is still there. Are they still good? We're going to look at some people, I think, that, probably in their deepest, darkest hours of despair, probably thought the same thing. When people find themselves in exile, we do that for a lot of different reasons. When we feel like we're alone, we feel like we're someplace that, we just don't fit. We begin to get angry. You ever done that? You get angry at God. God, you ever heard anybody say this, or maybe you have, God, if you're really good? Questioning his goodness. You wouldn't be so distant or even angry. God, I don't believe you could ever be good again. When people say that, extreme loss, or things that just doesn't make sense, that they're, God, I don't think you're good. I don't think you can ever be good again. So the Israelites are in exile, and this isn't even Daniel's fault. See, the world, in our world, this isn't our fault. You know what I'm saying? The world has spiraled, and we find ourselves as followers of Jesus with all these dilemmas, shots and no shots, and the government, and all of those things that seem to overwhelm us, that we find ourselves in this exile. We know what God's Word says, but it's hard. So how does Daniel handle this? I'm excited about today because a lot of the things that I've been hearing, a lot of the questions people have been asking, they're going to be answered this morning. As far as how do we that want to follow Jesus the best we can fit into a world that doesn't care. That we find that customs and culture and all those things are countercultural. At what point do we stand up? Do we say something? Do we do something? And I believe this morning Daniel and his friends are going to answer that and how God handled it. So let's get into this in your first blanks. In our minds, when you and I are in exile, we ask two questions of God. Is God good? Right? Anytime we find ourselves in an exile type of thing where we're alone, we always question God's goodness. And the second thing is, does God care? I hear it from people that don't follow Jesus. And the reason is, if there was a good God, then why? And they list all of these bad things. So this morning we're going to talk about Daniel. He had three buddies. Maybe you've heard of them. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You heard those guys? We're going to talk about those guys this morning. And so you have to understand, let me read Daniel 1:4 first. It says, young men without any, this is the people they took. Young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand and qualified to serve the king's palace. So these guys were bright. They were young guys. They were the best of the best that Jerusalem had to offer. In verse 20 it says, in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in the whole kingdom. Now, remember, they're Israelites. They were in Jerusalem. Now they're in exile. They're living in a land that doesn't serve God, that doesn't worship God, that doesn't have the same customs that these guys would be used to. God promotes them. Do you find yourself there? I do. Everywhere I look, so many things aren't my beliefs and what I feel like in following Jesus, and I feel this confliction. He even changes their names. So here's these guys with their own identities, right? They're in Israel and Jerusalem, and now they're in Babylonian territory. So they're in the enemy territory. And Nebuchadnezzar has the gall to change their names. I mean, our names are our identity, and so the names he would have given them would have trying to take that identity away from them, trying to take away the God that they knew, trying to take all of that away. Trying to get them to be so immersed in this culture that they finally just forget the one true God, that he ever existed. And at one point, I wonder if those guys had those two questions. Is God good? Does he care? He promised us this, and we're here. It isn't our fault. It's, children of Israel before them, and all the decisions that were made, all the bad kings that we've talked about, in this culmination that God says there's no remedy, so this is what has to happen. Were they thinking that? Were they thinking, God, you got to intervene, or I'm really going to become a Babylonian? I don't want to, because that's what happens. They were there a long time. It's not like they were in exile for a week, a month. It says they were there from 603 BC to 539. They were in exile for 65 years. We're going to look this morning at 3 stories out of the first 6 chapters of Daniel, and I know most of you are familiar with them. Here's what I want to come out of it. I want you to understand, these guys were behind enemy lines. How many would you would agree, as followers of Jesus, we're behind enemy lines? Scripture tells us, even a few weeks ago, that this isn't our home, and aren't you glad, right? We look at everything and how bad it is, but this isn't what we were created for. We're created for another world, right? We were created for heaven. We're created to live forever. We're just passing through here. So I want you to, as we go through these stories and these guys and their experiences, put yourself there, because you are there. But watch how they respond. So the first one is the dream. King Nebuchadnezzar has this horrible dream, and like most kings did, they wanted to know, interpret this for me. In fact, they're pretty, lots of anxiety. I mean, they're to the point the king said he calls all of his advisors and his magicians and astrologers and all of those people. He calls them in and says, interpret this, and if you don't, I'm going to kill you. Simple as that. You're going to tell me what this means, because I'm having nightmares and I don't like that. So somehow Daniel gets lumped into this. And the solution is to ask his friends, because remember, they're in with the king. I mean, they're kind of in that area. They're like advisors. They're very wise. They're very well thought of. So the king goes to the other 3 guys. And in Daniel 2:18 it says, plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men in Babylon. So during the night, God interprets the dream through Daniel. Aren't you glad that God always shows up sometimes, but it's the last minute that he's always there? He shows up. So he interprets the dream. 4 kingdoms, yours will end and 4 more will come. The last one will be divided, and it will be a mixture of people. And in Daniel 2:44 through 45, it says, in the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. That's encouraging. Nor will be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end. And I will tell you, that's going to happen. This story ends, right? We're in this story. We're in God's upper story. You all realize that one day when God says, I'm done, I've written the end, all the kingdoms are going to be crushed and bring everything to an end, because his kingdom will reign forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of a mountain, but not by human hands, a rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. In the midst of exile, Daniel trusts his God. Do we? What I don't see Daniel doing in the midst of all of this, from what I read, I don't see him protesting again. I don't see him. Of course, they didn't have Facebook. I don't know what would have been culturally relevant for the day, but I don't know he did that. He trusted in his God, and his God showed up. Verse 47, the king said to Daniel, surely your God is the God, after he interprets the dream, your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and the reveler of mysteries, for you were able to reveal this. So in our exile, God is either good or he's not. You have to answer that, right? It didn't look good. It didn't look good for him. He's facing death. I mean, he was close to death, and God reveals the dream. But guess what happens? It's not just that Daniel's life is saved. It's that everybody now, the king knows that this is God. This is the one true God. So here's the second one, and this one I think we all love this one. The furnace. Remember that story? I love this for a lot of reasons. So Nebuchadnezzar, we'll just call him Nebi for short, just because I get tired of saying Nebuchadnezzar. So he makes this image of gold. And in Daniel 3, 4 through 6, it says, the herald loudly proclaimed, nations and peoples of every language. This is what you're going to do. As soon as you hear the sound of all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of the gold that King Nebi has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into the furnace. Now, what do? What do followers of Jesus do when we know that something's not right? You got to take a stand, and so that's what these guys are doing. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they're not bound down to anybody but the one true God. They know that. In Daniel 3:12, it says, but there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon. And this is the people talking, who pay no attention to you, king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. So these guys were in some high up political positions. And you see it in our day, right? You hear all of this stuff about all of these people. So it went on back then too. So they would have wanted these guys dead because they could have been promoted themselves. So the king is furious. I mean, kings got, when people didn't do what they wanted, especially when it came to worship idols or do what they said or defy them, and they're just going to kill them. That's just the world in which they lived. Verse 15, if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Sometimes I feel that way. Sometimes I feel people taunt us. You're Christians? Okay, let your God deliver you. That's what he's saying here. Then what God's going to be able to rescue you from this furnace? You've created this mess yourself. You're going to die. You have to understand, this would not have been a regular furnace. This one was used for making bricks or pottery, metalwork. It was hot. It was 7 times hotter. The likely temperature, a regular temperature, would be between 900 and 1,000 degrees. This would have been hotter than that. Some said it was comparison to molten lava. It's hot. He wasn't playing. It's not just the furnace. I'm turning this thing up 7 times just to prove a point and let your God rescue you. Think they question God, are you good? God, do you care? They're in exile. They're on somebody else's turf. In verse 16 and 17, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend. I love this. For a lot of reasons. We don't need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. And he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. Verse 18. But even if he doesn't, we want you to know this, your majesty, we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. So they're confident. So they're saying, we know, King, we know our God can do this, but even if he chooses not to or whatever, we're not doing this. So of course we know the stories. Crank it up. And they crank up the furnace, and the two guards that throw the three guys in, they die instantly because of the heat. Verse 24 and 25, then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, don't you love this? Can you picture this? Weren't there three men that were tied up and thrown into the fire? Didn't we? There were three guys, right? Am I hallucinating? There were three. And they replied, certainly, Your Majesty. He said, look, I see four men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the fourth looks like a son of the gods. Even in the midst of the fire, God's with us. Even in the furnace, even in a world that we find we're in exile, we don't know what to do. How much can we take? We see this and we see that. And all of those, either God's good and he's going to deliver us or he's not. We have to settle that. We have to know that God is with us. Verse 26 through 28, so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their head singed. I don't know about you, but I've lit fires outside, got a little close, and just a little close, and they get singed. These guys were in this fire 7 times hotter. It was melting metal. Not even a hair was singed. Their robes weren't scorched. And there was no smell of fire on them. I mean, if you're even remotely close to a fire, you reek of smoke, right? Burn the leaves outside, go in, and you can't stand it. Then the king said, praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's, get this, they trusted in him, they defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any God except their own God. So again, facing death, facing hate and all of those around them, we find ourselves in the same thing. God, are you good? God, do you care? Here's the last story, and I love this one just as much. It's the lions. Probably most of us have heard the story. We've seen the little story books and all of that about Daniel and the lion's den. It says that Daniel served Nebuchadnezzar first year to the beginning to the reign of King Darius. So he's there a long time. What I didn't understand when Daniel was an older gentleman. I was 80 years old, so I would just say, he was an older fella. He wasn't teen. It's in my mind for whatever reason. I'm thinking he's this young guy they throw into. He's not. He came to Babylon when he was 14. Can you imagine he's lived in exile all this time? It's a long time to be separated from the land you loved, the customs you knew, the comfort you had. All the while he's had questioning kings. He's had people threaten to kill him. He's in a foreign land, and I imagine he's tired. You ever find yourself tired? I don't know. We listen to that stupid box that controls most of our lives called a television. We have all this stuff feeding us, all of this stuff that we're going, how bad is this? We're just tired. Daniel 6, 3 through 4 says, Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. So again, we found this with Joseph. Now we're finding it with Daniel. He's in exile. He's not one of them, but he was so exceptional that God elevated him. The king was going to promote him over everything, and they could not find any corruption in him. So he was above reproach. He was trustworthy. Verse 5, finally, of course, you got people are jealous. They're jealous because here's an outsider, and the king wants to promote him. And they say, we will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it's something to do with the law of his God. So his character is impeccable. We're never going to find anything with his character. The only thing we can do to get him to disagree with the king is to do something against the law of his God. So apparently, they saw something in him. He's Daniel, so remember, 65 years, he's in exile, but he's still following the one true God. They know that. They know, they've seen it. They've seen him practice. They probably have watched him. And we talk about, we can preach, but people are watching us, right? They watch us and how we conduct our lives and how we go to school and how we do all of those things. So they've done this. So he has this dedication to God in the midst of exile. So they're going to go after the one thing they know. Daniel loves his God and he'll never do anything against him. Verse 10 and 11, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home. Get this. He goes home to his upstairs room where the windows open towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day he had got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. So what he didn't do is just protest. I'm not going to do that. Instead, what he did was, he goes home, windows are already open. He gets down on his knees like he had always done. He's not protesting, well, I'm going to do this because you tell me I can't. He's saying, I'm not changing what I do. And I have done this. This is my habit. They know he's done that. He says, look, I'm not mad. I'm just going to do what I would have always done. I'm not going to hide it. And I love that. Then asking these men went as a group and they found Daniel praying and asking God for help. Verse 16, the king gave the order. They brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve, continually rescue you. And he can't sleep because he didn't want to do that. I mean, he liked Daniel. He was going to promote him, but it was his decree. Now, if he didn't follow through, then everybody else, it doesn't make it. He's a strong king, right? When you're an authority, you got to back up what you say. And so he can't sleep. So the next morning, verse 21 and 22, the king comes in and he shouts, hey, everything okay in there? Hoping that somehow Daniel's alive. And Daniel answers it. He says, may the king live forever. My God sent his angel and he shut the mouths of the lions. My God, they have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty. So he's saying, I just serve my God. I don't mean to be rebellious, but I serve my God the way I serve my God. I'm not going to compromise. But do you see how he dealt with him? See, I don't see how I see a lot of Christians doing it today. They're mad, they're upset, they're angry, they're defiant. He's not. He simply says, your majesty, I'm innocent. I've not done anything before you. I'm just going to do what I've always done. Because that's my God. Daniel wasn't in the pit by himself. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego weren't in the furnace by themselves. They were in exile all that time, and God was with them. Here's the third question that I think Daniel would bring out if he's here this morning. Is God there? Sometimes I'd heard a preacher say one time that sometimes going through problems, sometimes the presence of God, when that's all you have, it has to be enough. To know that God's there. It couldn't have looked good to be thrown into this fire. I mean, I know what they said, but in their minds, or maybe there had to have been a little. Nobody would look forward to that. It couldn't have been great when they said, okay, we're going to throw you, Daniel, into these hungry lions. Is God there? And I believe they knew he was going to be. Last blank is when God is there, we have the chance to rediscover how God is good. I was going to play a song this morning. I couldn't get it downloaded, but it's one of my favorite bands from years ago called Down Here, and I'm not going to sing it for you. I wish I could. I always argued with God, why couldn't I be one of those singing? You've seen them, man. They preach a sermon, and and the good thing about a singing pastor is if the sermon's going south, you just start belting out the song, and everybody forgets the sermon. But I don't know if you've ever heard the song, but it's called "Let Me Rediscover You" by Down Here. That's what it talks about. Let me rediscover who you are. Showing me, a life. And sometimes I think we forget. We need to rediscover the God that we serve. See, his kingdom is bigger than kings. He says, one day I'm destroying all of it. All of it's going to be destroyed because my kingdom is the one that's going to reign forever. So my encouragement this morning is you have to settle, is God there? And if He is, understand you're in exile. Daniel and them were in exile for 65 years. They went through trial after trial and furnace and lions and all of those, but they found themselves faithful, and the rest of the world looked at them. They weren't making these, they didn't have to do stuff that was just overboard. They did what they knew to do because they followed Jesus. They read their Bible. They read scriptures. They would have done. They hung out together. They worshiped. They didn't do anything extra except what they normally did. I keep telling people, I don't know that we have to go out of our way as Christ followers nowadays for people to know that we follow Him. I think if you're living your life the way you're supposed to, they're going to know, right? They're just gonna. By the way we talk, by the way maybe that we're not angry, the way we respond on social media. The last 6 chapters of Daniel are also prophetic chapters, and I love it. Daniel's having kind of a bad day. Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 and 14. He says, I saw a vision at night. I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man coming with clouds of heaven. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped Him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away. His kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. I guess what I'm saying is, and the more I'm reading and understanding this upper and lower story, is that's not changing. I don't care who's in office. I don't care what goes on down here. That's not going to change. His kingdom is going to come, and it's going to be it's here now, but at one point everything else is going to be wiped out, and is His kingdom forever. Exile is not forever, right? We feel that way, but this is not our home. We're just passing through. We feel like we're in this world that we don't belong, and we probably should feel that way, right? We're different. I keep telling kids, when I was a youth pastor for years, let me talk to your friends. And let me see how everybody says they're a Christian. Let me talk to your friends. Let me tell you, see what they say. We should be different. We shouldn't blend in. Exile is going to come to an end. Jesus said, all power and authority has been given to me. He isn't presidents. They're given authority for now. But guess what happens? God has the ultimate authority. A new king has come. A new kingdom that doesn't care about hungry lions or flaming furnaces or paranoid kings. There's a kingdom that stomps out bitterness and unforgiveness, racism, addiction, darkness, and sadness out of existence. And it's the kingdom of God. And it's contrary to the world. Jesus came into exile to lead us out of exile. He came clothed in flesh, according to John 1:14. It says the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, or another translation is moved into the neighborhood. Came to flesh and He moved into the neighborhood. Revelations 21. God's dwelling place is now among the people, and He will dwell with them. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, mourning, crying. This is something typically you read at a funeral. But my gosh, it's something to shout about if you're alive right now. There will be no death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. Guys, this isn't it. There's a new order coming. All of these things that hurt us, right? We all care. I was talking the other day about the brokenness that we all have through our life and the things that's happened because it's a fallen world. But at some point, this all changes. And that's the encouragement for us that, yeah, it's not, we don't like it. Daniel didn't like it. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego didn't like it. But God still moved. Because God was there. And I will tell you, in the midst of all of the darkness and everything, God is still here. He's moving. He's at work. And your job and my job is to find out where He's at work and jump in with Him. Is He at work in schools? Absolutely. Right? All the teachers are going back. He's at work. They're taking Him into the schools. One thing I've always hated was we've taken God out of our schools. We have not. To me, that's stupidity. Every time a kid goes in that's following Jesus, he's in the school. I guarantee it. He's at our work. He's in all of these places. We complain that the government did this. The government can't silence